So welcome everybody. My name is Joanna Gubman and I'm a co-lead with Urban Environmentalists. And we're hosting this Lunch and Learn with the Port of San Francisco along with AWE, the Association of Women in Water, Energy and Environment. And we have our guest, Diane Oshima with the Port of San Francisco. I want to just start by noting that we are recording this. So if you're uncomfortable with that, feel free to log off and log back in with a anonymous name and keep your video off, and then you can remain anonymous, but we are recording this. So I'll say a few words about Urban Environmentalists. Our mission is to address the climate and inequality crises by transforming cities and towns into inclusive communities designed around people rather than cars. We value healthy communities and environments that are supportive of all life, vibrant, diverse, and nurturing urban communities with abundant housing and opportunities for all, and efficient, equitable use of our planet's resources, especially land. And if you like what you hear today, we do have more upcoming events in the works. One will be an event with the Greenbelt Alliance, and another one that we're just getting started on organizing will be on the intersection of policing and urban environmentalism. So we'll hope to see you there too. And now, Megan, I'll hand it over to you to introduce AWE.
You can hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, good. Hi, everyone. I'm Megan Roberts. I'm the Executive Director of the Association of Women in Water, Energy, and Environment. I was saying earlier that we call ourselves AWE for short, since that's kind of a mouthful. I'm really excited to be here today, and I just want to start by thanking Joanna and the Urban Environmentalists for organizing this event and extending the invitation to AWE members to participate. I see several familiar names in the participant list, so welcome, friends. And I also just want to take a moment to share a little bit about AWE for those of you who aren't familiar with us. I know our speaker even said, I've never heard of you. So real quick, AWE is a 501c3 nonprofit. We were founded in 2007, and we're really just focused on supporting women to grow professionally in the fields of water, energy, and environment. We have over 2,000 members throughout California, and actually, since we've been in this virtual world the last few months, we've seen some new members join from out of state, and I even saw someone join from Australia recently. So very exciting development, some silver lining in the challenges we're going through right now. So ordinarily, we would be hosting 20 or 30 in-person events throughout the state. They might be presentations and panel discussions, professional development workshops, but our most popular events are tours and kind of behind the scenes access events. So unfortunately, we haven't been able to host some of those types of events, but we are really embracing this virtual space. Actually on track to host probably 60 or more events this year, since these virtual events are so convenient to bring speakers together and for our members to access really no matter where they are. So yeah, we're really kind of thriving in this moment, and that's really, really exciting. We also host an annual mentoring program for our members. That's a year-long engagement. We have a cohort going through the program right now, and we'll start taking applications for our 2021 cohort later this fall. That's really just a great opportunity for women to connect with other women in their fields and really kind of learn and share with each other. We actually call it the exchange, sort of recognizing that learning goes both ways. So if you're interested in having a mentor in that field, I definitely encourage you to look at our website and check out our information there. And last but not least, I just want to welcome everyone who's joining us that is not currently a member to visit our website, awe.org. And if you go to the join page, you can enter discount code PORT of SF, all caps, no spaces. That'll get you 20% off your first year dues. And if you're in a particularly challenging time facing unemployment or furlough, we actually are offering a free hardship membership for the remainder of 2020. You can access that on our website too. So if you're in that position or you know someone who is and wants to get connected with community, send them our way, because we are welcoming folks with open arms and happy to extend our services to anyone who needs them. So that's my bit. I'll pass it over to you. I'm really looking forward to this event today.
Thanks so much, Megan. And I'm so glad we're able to do this together and that we have a great woman speaker to join us. And hopefully we can also dive into some women-specific issues relating to the port as we talk. So before we get going, I just want to mention a couple of logistics. Feel free, I think there's a chat window. You can use that just for side conversations, anybody who wants. And then we're also going to have Q&A integrated into our event this time. So we're trying something new. And the plan is, if you are able to raise your hand, then Zach is running the Zoom, and he and I will look out for any raised hands and call on you as we go along, so that Diane can answer your questions as they are relevant. So maybe if you are able to raise your hand, let's practice doing so now, and then we can see how that, we can just all know that it works. Okay, yes, I am seeing raised hands. Awesome.
You can find it in the participants button in most apps.
Yeah, thanks for clarifying. Mine is in German, so I never know what the English words are. Okay, and then you can unraise your hand as well, which is good, so that I know that your question has been resolved, or in this case is not a question. Okay, great. Looks like folks have that. So now let me say a few words about Diane Oshima, and then we'll get going. I'll hand it over to her. So Diane is the Deputy Director of Planning and Environment for the Port of San Francisco. Diane and her team are responsible for managing land use, planning, and policy for port facilities that support 10 maritime industries and a diverse mix of industrial, commercial, recreational, and public activities that together create a vibrant urban waterfront that we all love so much. Her team has expertise in historic preservation, environmental protection and sustainability, waterfront urban design and open space planning, implementation and regulatory compliance. And before joining the Port of SF in '98, Diane worked for the San Francisco Planning Department for 17 years, so she knows a lot of things about, I don't know, how to make this all work. So Diane, please take it away.
Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm really excited to be with you, just because I didn't know either of these groups, and it's really exciting to see that you're so organized and enthusiastic. You know, I won't go on too much about the introduction. I think Joanna kind of captured it. But I will say that we actually have amazing women who are OWI women in the port. So Megan in particular would be a good opportunity to see where there are opportunities for you guys to get together. Carol Bach is the head of my environmental team, and we have extraordinary women who are extraordinarily skilled and knowledgeable about waterfront regulations and creative sustainability initiatives. And we actually have a guy too. So I don't know if OWI allows for men to participate, but there's an opportunity there too. So that's a good thing to bookmark and just start off. I understood from Joanna that, you know, there's a particular interest in the green transportation, affordable housing. And so I have tried to pick up some of those elements in this presentation, which is actually more just, I'm going to roll out some information based on what I understand to be the interests of the group today. And as Joanna said, I really thrive on being able to just make this conversational, and so please not be shy about your questions. So I thought what I would do is I have a slide deck here that Zach is going to help me out with here to provide an overview of the port through the lens of the waterfront plan. And my career has been in San Francisco exclusively, in public sector the entire time. I know the city well, I know the waterfront well, and the integration of the city and the waterfront has really become the theme. The port has 7.5 miles of waterfront from Fisherman's Wharf down to India Basin, but being such a thin sliver of property along that, it cannot operate in a silo. It really needs to be integrated with the rest of the city at large, but particularly for all of the bordering neighborhoods and districts along the way, so that it really is seamless. The waterfront keeps its character, but it becomes an amenity for the nearby neighbors as well as for the city and the region. One of the other key points that is unique about the port is that while it looks and functions like a city department, it has state responsibilities because most of the lands were formerly owned by the state. And in 1969, the state transferred those properties to the city and county of San Francisco, which is what the port is now responsible for managing. But the rules and the requirements for improvements and land uses on port property have to straddle between state requirements as well as city requirements. And then if you're familiar with the waterfront environment and the regulatory agency network that applies specifically to the waterfront, then you have to layer on top of that all of the environmental protections that are carried out by a fair number of public regulatory agencies. So it becomes kind of this complicated stew of stuff. And the waterfront plan is the port's master plan, essentially, a long-term master plan that lays out the goals and policies for how port properties should be used, managed, and stewarded, both on the natural and environmental resources as well as the built land uses. And I thought it would be helpful just to sort of quickly run through the foundational goals of the waterfront plan, because even though we may end up talking more specifically about the topics that you're interested in, it's important to understand that that's operating in this larger framework. So with that, let's go to the first slide. Maritime. People tend to forget that the Port of San Francisco actually has maritime. Back in 1991, voters were actually concerned that the port itself might be abandoning the maritime functions of the city, and voted an initiative that required this waterfront plan to be developed that made sure that it paid attention first to the needs of maritime. So the waterfront plan today, which has been recently updated after a very lengthy public process, has reaffirmed the maritime mission of the port. It's important to align the citizen understanding and support, because that state entity and those responsibilities I was referring to make maritime, public access, maritime commerce key requirements that the Port Commission must carry out. Those are some of our public trust responsibilities. And those public trust responsibilities also include environmental management and restoration, and bringing people to the shore to be able to do business or recreate or to refresh. It's a public resource. It really dates back to common law of the waterfront being a life source for the livelihood and enjoyment of the people. And those are the principles that we still carry forward today and are espoused in the waterfront plan. There are 10 different maritime industries. They all have a unique set of operations, and that's as much as I'm going to say about how much maritime attention that we have going on at the port. Next slide. While maritime was the genesis for the creation of the port, over time, this last 100+ years, it's evolved into being a city resource. So the waterfront plan goal recognizes that you don't need everything for maritime. While you have to give first priority to that concern, then you have to also look at what are the rest of the city's needs. And so basically the waterfront plan is saying we're part of the city, and just like the city has many different facets, so does the waterfront, for business, commercial, recreation, jobs and economic opportunities. So the social and environmental justice issues that really were discussed also as part of our updating the plan was a point of specific focus. And so carrying out the use of these properties, how they're managed, is also about the people who are needy of that or who should be getting better opportunities to participate.
And Diane, how did you engage the public when you were doing that? How did you make sure that you got those really diverse perspectives on what needs are?
It's been a long process, but we put out all call to citywide through various networks and had an application process. Essentially, we created a waterfront plan working group, which had 27 members on it, and we needed to make sure they had environmental, maritime, commercial, open space, citywide, regional interests, and culled through that application process to create a working group. And then we picked two extraordinary chairs to head that working group, Janice Lee, who many of you know from the Bike Coalition, and then Rudy Nothenberg, who was really the key driver and project manager that brought about the whole Embarcadero Freeway demolition and the replacement of the new transportation, what was then the new transportation system along the Embarcadero, to manage this group. All of the meetings were publicly noticed, so it was open to the public and videoed so that people who couldn't come to the meeting had access to be able to get that. So our intention was really to make sure that anybody could have access to the information as well as the discussions. And that group met for 3 years and produced 161 recommendations, 160 of which were unanimously recommended. And they were basically the source of what were the updates in the policies for the waterfront plan. So the Port Commission endorsed all of their work. We have a draft waterfront plan that is now going through the environmental review process. So it's a great time for any of you to just get familiarized with that, because that's kind of the long-term land use policy framework for the port. And we're happy to engage any further discussions and meetings as needed. Next slide, please. So key among those many other uses besides maritime is open space. And I would say over the last 25 to 30 years, it has been the dawn of really recognizing the need to develop a connected network of public access and open space. And now with where the thinking is going on transportation systems and public realm, where the public spaces of our roadways and walkways are also part of our open space system, the policies in the waterfront plan try to embrace and frame all of that. In the last 15 years, 10 to 15 years, there's been a particular focus on creating a waterfront parks and public access network along the southern waterfront, from Mission Bay down to Hunters Point. And that's the Blue Greenway, for those of you who might be familiar with. In the industrial waterfront, we can't just replicate what you get along the Embarcadero waterfront down in the southern waterfront. You have to really maintain that maritime and industrial land use system, but find those places where the open spaces still can and should be, and provide for recreational opportunities, not only from the land, but also from the water. So for water recreation, for kayaking and human-powered water recreation, there's been a lot of focus to make those open space systems port-wide, but particularly in the southern waterfront, available for water recreation as well, because of the calmer waters that are in the southern waterfront.
And Diane, can you talk more about, I know the southern waterfront also is more in the Bayview-Hunters Point area with a historically Black community. And I know there are also a lot of social justice aspects about access to open space and access to sport and recreation. Can you talk a little bit more about how you incorporated those concepts or solicited community input?
Yeah, There's, so I'm going to jump ahead a little bit, but we have actually, so the waterfront plan, the first waterfront plan that was the result of this ballot initiative that was approved was put in place in 1997. And then last year, we finished this long public process to do an update. In that time between, there were also recommendations about community engagement. And so over the last 20 years, we have had port advisory committees for different segments along the entire waterfront. And there's a Southern Waterfront Advisory Committee, the SWAC, that has been just kind of an ongoing group of community representatives in the Southern Waterfront that we've been engaging with over the last 20 years. All of our advisory committee meetings, like the working group for the waterfront plan, are public meetings. So we try and keep the door open for newcomers and anybody who wants to participate. But we draw, so we'd had a lot of relationships already going into the effort to define and develop the Blue Greenway. And the Blue Greenway was actually an initiative from Mayor Gavin Newsom at the time that was recognizing that the Southern Waterfront was closed off to the public at large, and particularly, not providing any kind of benefit for those disadvantaged communities who most needed those kinds of resources, given the environmental conditions, the historical environmental conditions that have been present in the Bayview and the visitation and down in the southern end. And that was one of the reasons why the Blue Greenway came up. Is there's a lot of good open space that's developing in the northern half. What are we doing in the southern half from Mission Bay down? So the Blue Greenway guidelines, there was an interagency effort to develop a plan, guidelines, identify where those different opportunities for parks were. And many of them were on the port, but some of them were in Hunters Point Shipyard, and some of them were in India Basin, and some of them were down in Candlestick Point. And what we were trying to do is bridge between all of these different jurisdictions and developer redevelopment kinds of projects, so that all of those entities are trying to contribute towards a whole system. And the port took the lead in helping to develop those Blue Greenway guidelines. So it's on us to kind of deliver on that as well. So some of the projects that I'll talk about later on are trying to be that implementation phase of the outcomes of creating the Blue Greenway network, the guidelines, and then these policies that we've incorporated into our plan. Next slide, please. Goes without saying that whatever improvements that go in along the waterfront have to really be done well, with attention to not just high quality design, but looking at what is the setting within which that improvement is taking shape, and the different personalities of the neighborhoods and the districts that abut the waterfront are good cues for influencing then the design and the utility of the improvement going in place. And that's a way of being, inclusive of the broad swath of districts and neighborhoods that the waterfront cuts through. We also have incredible historic resources. It's a sustainability as well as historic resource stewardship mission to reuse and manage those historic resources for modern purposes while respecting their historic roots to the extent possible. So we bring a lot of that into the work through my division. Next slide, please. Why is, the port an enterprise agency? We are a business. We lease properties, we generate rents. That's what provides seed money for being able to maintain and improve the waterfront, and to provide business opportunities for small businesses that are peppered along the entire waterfront, and or creating opportunities for disadvantaged communities. So economic access for all is multi-pronged at the port. The port probably has the largest industrial land portfolio in San Francisco that remains. And the city really needs to have a diverse economic base, not only to persevere through economic hardship times like we have now through recessions, where you don't put it all in the tourism basket, but you do have, you know, specialized job opportunities in the maritime and industrial. It provides different entry points for different kinds of job skills. And the development opportunities, our development partners, when they do construction, President Kim Brandon of the Port Commission is the thought leader for, I think, for the city, but certainly for the port, about innovative ways in which enterprise public agencies like the port leverage their role to create new pathways and opportunities for job opportunities, for engagement of design of developments, and participation in the public conversations.
Do you have any specific examples of how the port works to bring in, you know, let's say more women, for example, since you've got a lot of women on this call, into these fields?
You know, I could say more about
Or people of color?
Yeah, people of color and economically disadvantaged and local businesses, local business enterprises. You know, we can't call them minority business enterprises or, you know, a women-owned, you know, I mean, maybe we'll revisit 209, but whatever. I mean, we have to go by the city rules. And within that, there are many women-owned firms as well as minority-owned firms that register and make themselves available. And President Brandon has been extraordinary in her efforts. And this is over the last 10 years with a clear focus on that I think it's really reaping benefits. The port is actually, you know, we've got a lot of women working in the port. So I think that, again, in my environmental team, I have 4 women environmental professionals and 1 man. So he's the minority in my case. And I have an environmental background as well. So that would make it 6 to 1. So, you know, I think I can't say that we have as much of a defined focus beyond the LBE status on the women. But if you're a small business and you're women, or you're minority owned, then there's going to be opportunities. And I do have some details about that too, that, I mean, I could share with you now. I was going to kind of share it at the end, but
we can keep going, and if there are questions, we'll go.
Okay. So it's interactive. We can go any way we want. I just sort of planned a certain sequence, but we do not need to stay with that. Okay, next slide. So here's one thing that sounds like it's right up your bailiwick. It's transportation and mobility. So this is one of the issues that we kind of contended with a lot in the waterfront plan update process. You know, we have the Embarcadero along, it's on port-owned property. And so people tend to think that the port is responsible for the transportation services along there. But the reality is the port is not really a transportation agency. Our ability to support transportation generally is dependent on the strength of our relationships and collaborations with MTA, with the Transportation Authority, with all of the transportation providers, even the water transportation providers. We will work with the water transportation providers, Golden Gate Ferry, the Water Emergency Transportation Agency, to work with their master plans to figure out where are the places that make sense to create new water transportation terminals and services. But at the end of the day, they're the agencies that are going to be delivering the actual service to the people. So we cannot be going on an independent basis to try and manage that, nor do we manage bus systems, muni transit service levels, bikeways, even you know, many of the pedestrian requirements come from the city family, and then we're trying to layer that in a way that fits in within the waterfront. So the Embarcadero and Enhancement Project is probably something that some of your members are familiar with as an MTA project that the port is working in lockstep with to create a two-way cycle track along the east side of the Embarcadero that will have to happen in phases, but it needs to be designed in a way to meet all of the Vision Zero safety and mobility initiatives that the city is promoting in a way that doesn't foreclose maritime business access needs or the other businesses that are working along the Embarcadero, or how do we make it work with our open spaces? There are some, synergies between there, and sort of weaving and integrating in is a big part of what we need to do, because in many cases where we have tenants and their business operations, if MTA just kind of laid down their plan without consultation, we could be cutting off a business without realizing it, hurting the port's enterprise status, and not ending up with the best product in the process. And so that collaboration is very essential. So I just actually came off of a 2-hour session with MTA and our real estate staff to keep that syncopation in place. And there are transportation policies that are new in the Waterfront Plan update that are trying to recognize and embrace that city family and oftentimes regional family of needs that need to be coordinated. BART, the ferry building's a regional transportation center, so all of those regional systems that rely on functionality there is something that we need to pay attention to. Next slide, please.
Before we move on, let me just jump in, since it's an area that we're really focused on, designing cities around people and not cars. Can you describe more specifically some of the ways that you're working in the context with all of these other agencies to focus more on space for people and less on space for cars, whether that's pedestrians or bicyclists?
Yeah, I mean, I think this Embarcadero enhancement is really the one that kind of is probably the clearest example. I mean, in general, there's been a huge, elimination of parking along the Embarcadero. So if any of you were around when the Embarcadero Freeway was still up, that freeway was like an awning for all this parking that was underneath. The Embarcadero transportation system itself removed an enormous amount of parking. It added this transit system in there such that then you could reduce the number of lanes and put it on the surface level for vehicles instead of having a freeway. And that this, broad Embarcadero promenade was like maybe one of the widest sidewalks in the city, except that it's not treated as a city sidewalk because of those maritime functions that still need to have access. And historically, the sidewalk, the promenade area, was a working area for maritime businesses that continues in different ways still to today, in much smaller footprint than it used to, but we still need to attend to that. When we have a cruise ship that comes in and there are all these semis that are bringing in all the stores to bring the food and the stuffs to load onto the cruise ships, those are, still some heavy industrial kinds of access points that we now manage. So we do it early in the morning and do it when people aren't there, and then it makes it easier. Same thing for the fishing industry. They have to go all the way up to Fisherman's Wharf from the freeways with, the volumes of fish that come in and out of Fisherman's Wharf that stock all of the restaurants in the Bay Area. There's a lot of truck traffic and whatnot there, but again, that's an early morning industry, so that we try and time it in a temporal way to balance the pedestrian, the public needs with the maritime and the industry needs.
So Fisherman's Wharf is not just a tourist attraction. It really does have fishermen still.
It is.
And women.
Yeah. San Francisco has the largest fishing center in Northern California. Some of you might have heard about the fire that we had on one of our sheds, a month and a half ago or so, which is devastating. I mean, it is really devastating to our crabbers in particular. They had stored all of their crab pots whatever crab you eat at the holidays came over Fisherman's Wharf at Pier 45. And so people just don't know the salmon. The salmon and crab are the big fisheries that are still operating. And then we've got fish processors who are preparing all the fish that go to all the restaurants that are that operate on Pier 45. And it's just one of those below the radar things that people don't realize. So, you know, we have to kind of remind people that there are legitimate maritime industrial functions that people value, but they need to accommodate that too. And so we're trying to be as creative as possible to balance all those needs. The Embarcadero Enhancement Project to bring this two-way cycle track is a Vision Zero response, and, you know, part of that alternative transportation, climate change, adaptation move that the city needs to take. And so, you know, how we do that, as I was referring to before, is balancing those legitimate needs. It's not to mean that you can't do the Embarcadero enhancement. You can, but then the users of those, of that bikeway, they need to maybe get off the promenade, because we have such dangerous conditions in many parts of the Embarcadero Promenade because they are too crowded with too many non-vehicle modes. And there are wheeled things that are going way too fast. There are throngs of people that are not really paying attention. And so we've gotten to a point where we really need to create more dedicated facilities for these different non-auto modes, because the experience and the safety has become that much of a concern. So it's, you know, vehicles and people, bikes have traditionally been the concern, but the people and the bikes safety issue is now really more of a front and center thing. So we're really excited to work with MTA on this effort.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions on mobility?
No hands raised. Folks, don't forget, you can raise your hand anytime.
Okay. So this should strike to the heart of, you know, the sweet spot of what both of your organizations are focused on. And again, it's somewhat below the radar. These 5 people that I was talking about in my environmental team, they have water, air quality, dredging, hazardous materials, environmental education and stewardship, expertise, boots on the ground kind of experience. And that has been in place for 20 or more years without people necessarily realizing it. So, and what that has done is it has informed our real estate and leasing staff so that our leases carry forward environmental protections that are put as obligations on our tenants. It has carried forward to the port maintenance staff that's responsible for doing all the fixes along the waterfront and doing it in a way that makes sure that we're not spilling stuff into the bay and we're protecting water quality. Or if we have some kind of spill, they have been trained to deal with the booms, and they can snap into action to deal with emergency spill responses and management in sync with our environmental team. In the area of natural habitat and natural areas, which Heron's Head is this spit of land here in the slide, which was solid fill that was dumped into the bay 40 years ago, 35 years ago, in anticipation of expanding that cargo terminal further, because at the time we thought containers were going to grow and that we were going to need more space. And then we found out that we didn't need it. And then it just sat there. And then we ended up doing a workout with BCDC, the Bay Conservation and Development Commission, on what do we do about this fill that's sitting in the water. And ultimately, over many years, under the leadership of Carol Bach, who's my environmental senior manager, we turned lemons into this lemonade of habitat resource, public access, and nature environmental education resource for the public at large, but particularly focused on partnering with the youth in Bayview-Hunters Point. And so that there's a few more slides at the end of this that I was going to kind of do a little more zeroing in. So we try and integrate that sustainability through not just the nature-based stuff, but the urban stuff too. And that idea is also infiltrated through now the Port's Waterfront Resilience Program that's dealing with the need to seismically strengthen the Embarcadero seawall and to develop a port-wide sea level rise adaptation and planning for the future waterfront needs in light of climate change and sea level rise. Next slide, please. Partnering for success. I mean, this is all about community engagement and finding ways in which we can be understood and that we can hear each other. So these port advisory committees that I was talking about earlier have been sort of a foundation point for that. But we're finding through this slide here is the Eco Center at Heron's Head Park. It's an off-the-grid facility that was built in partnership with an earlier organization that we were partnered with. And it's basically an environmental education center and public facility in the midst of a natural habitat area that was created off of a chunk of fill that was dumped that nobody knew what to do with. And we have found that it has provided hands-on ways for people to engage on planting or restoration of the plants, of understanding, at face value, what environmental degradation, and now we're finding that the rising tides is eroding Heron's Head. And so what are we going to do to adapt and maintain it? Because it's become it's got natural habitat value, and it's sort of a live case study of what, in a resilience planning context, as we look 50 or 100 years down the road at what we need to prepare for sea level rise, there's a live example here that we can cue off of for people to understand what nature-based adaptation solutions could look like. And so we try and use these things to educate and talk about it with each other in more concrete ways to make our understandings tangible. And so the partnering and the communications between the port and the public at large are multifaceted, but we're very dedicated to doing that. There's a port communications team that's been developed over the last 5 years that really is ramping up in that direction.
Fantastic.
Yes?
Oh, it just sounds great.
And then finally, I've sort of touched on some of our resilience. There's the Waterfront Plan sets some groundwork for an understanding and expectations about more detailed work that is now underway as part of the Waterfront Resilience Program. So we had those entry-level discussions about what is climate change and what is sea level rise and what does resilience mean? And so we've got goals and policies in the Waterfront Plan that are intended to provide the platform for now the more concrete ideas that could be implemented to strengthen the Embarcadero seawall in the northern half, and to start working with Islayas Creek and Mission Creek and Islayas Creek are two vulnerable areas to flooding that, in the southern waterfront, to be able to have the community conversations about those more specific needs and solutions. Next slide, please. So I'm going to just jump into a few projects because I was just trying to take the lead of what the interest was of the audience here, and many of you are probably familiar with this, but the next few slides speak to include affordable housing, and the premier one is this 88 Broadway and 735 Davis Street, which are affordable housing for seniors as well as the general population in the 30 to 70% of average median income units. There's 53 units on 735 Davis for seniors at 30 to 70% AMI. And at 88 Broadway, there's 125 units, apartment units for families in the 30 to 120% of AMI income levels. And this has been being developed by Bridge Housing. The project has been on 2 different sites, but they've been designed in tandem with each other to work as a unit. We work closely with the neighboring Golden Gateway, and ultimately we're able to get really a good level of support from the community for that. This facility will incorporate child care center for 50 kids, as well as ground floor commercial and retail functions that are intended to enliven the localized community there. And the noteworthy thing about doing housing on port property is that, as a general matter, housing is not a public trust use. And so when we do housing, it's usually because we've done it in partnership. Well, usually we have to do it in partnership with the State Lands Commission. That's our overseer on the state side, so that they can understand a rationale that we developed to go to the state legislature to enable housing to be developed on certain port properties. So any housing that's developed along the waterfront is the result of a workout of an interagency and policy justification that we've had to square with the state, as well as work through the usual local politics of the city. And so we're really, really proud of being able to do this project, because 100% affordable for such a mixed population, I think, is an accomplishment anywhere in town.
And Diane, how come it's the case that, I'm just not familiar with this, that commercial uses, for all the different kinds of commercial uses, are considered an okay use, but housing requires extra special permissions?
Well, actually, not all commercial uses are allowed either. So that's that might be the story for an in-depth next presentation. But the long and short of it is for office, for example, office is also not a trust use, but there is a recognition at the state that for our historic finger piers, for example, in this picture, you can see those historic finger piers. We've created a National Register Embarcadero Historic District that includes these finger piers. And by being on the National Register, that historic standing and our due diligence to demonstrate, here's what it costs to seismically upgrade and enable these piers to be reopened for public uses so that people can come into these piers and enjoy the waterfront, because otherwise all they are warehouses that are closed to the public. We need to have revenue generators to be able to finance those improvements. And in context then, State Lands has been able to understand, and BCDC, that there's a justification for allowing an office use or a revenue generating use that by itself would not be okay, but in concert with this bigger package of public benefits that would be delivered by a project is okay. And so working the details of these projects to be able to demonstrate how they're necessary to be able to reach the public trust end goals and objectives has been a big part of our, work.
Mm-hmm.
So next slide. The next few slides are about our big development project. Many of you are probably familiar because you might have had to vote on both of them. Mission Rock, which is just south of the ballpark on Lot A, and then further down Pier 70. So Mission Rock is 28 acres. It's a multi-phase development. So it's similar to what redevelopment projects used to be in the old days before redevelopment law was abolished. But because it's on all public-owned, public trust property, we had to do a long planning process with the community first to gather what are the public desires and values that the port should be advancing for the development of this site before we even went into soliciting for development partners. And then once we got the development partner, which was the Giants and Tishman Speyer, then we had to work with them so that they could develop a project and explain how it was responsive to all of those public values and objectives that had been set out by the port from the outset. And in the middle of that process, we had that great recession in 2007 and 8, and it kind of put everything on hold, and it changed the finances on that. And then we had politics that came in that required us to go to the voters to get approval of the height increases that would be necessary to support the kind of development that, you know, makes more efficient use. It's a large site, but it's an infill site. It's well served by public transit. So this is that transit-oriented development model that was trying to be actualized here at Mission Rock, that complemented everything else that was going on in Mission Bay, that responded to all the public values that we talked about in the planning process before the developer came on board, that took advantage of as much public financing as possible, and to work in sync with BCDC and state lands so that they could demonstrate that this project, even though it has housing and office, two non-trust uses, that they were being managed in a way to improve this part of the waterfront to make it a public trust win. So that's kind of, you know, there's a lot of details about any of these projects that we don't really have time to get into, but I'm happy to take any questions that people might have.
Folks, if you'd like to raise your hands, feel free. That certainly looks like a great use of public lands.
Yeah, so the park and the fort, so we're sitting in we're sitting in the ballpark and we're looking over the wall, and that park that you see on the south side of China Basin is a 5-acre park that itself is designed to be dealing with the tides. So, you know, in another presentation, it would be great to have the Giants Tishman team actually take you through all the climate change and the environmental sustainability principles that are embedded within the new infrastructure that they have planned for this. This site, the Pier 70 site, are both being elevated by 4 to 5 feet to deal with sea level rise, but then within that grade, there's also all sorts of engineering that are involved to try and keep these vibrant while recognizing the changes with climate change. Next slide, please. Oh, here's the China Basin Park. So a little more detail about, it's 5 acres. It's broken into and being designed to program for many different types of activities. And along the water's edge, which you can't really see in this image, is a whole tidal slope that is also integrating for the water habitat as well. Next slide, please. So Brookfield is our development partner for the largest area of Pier 70, another 28-acre site. Many of you may be familiar with along 20th Street. We have a different development partner that has rescued all those amazing Union Ironworks historic buildings there. They were literally condemned to be lost, and we did a Hail Mary to see if any crazy developer would come on board to save those buildings, and they have. There are also historic resources here in the Brookfield waterfront site area, and they are off to the races along with Mission Bay, Mission Rock team to move forward on the first phase of development. But through Mission Rock and Brookfield, the open spaces, the walkways, the connectivity to the north and the south are all informed by that Blue Greenway plan. So all of these are clicking into what the Blue Greenway guidelines and opportunities laid out before these developers were on the scene. And like Mission Rock, we spent years with the community to develop a Pier 70 master plan for what the port and the public thought should be the values that should be achieved with any development. And Brookfield has done a phenomenal job of kind of fitting their foot into the slipper where there needed to be changes and adjustments, working with the community further to explain why. And we've got strong consensus about where they're going. Next slide, please. At the other end of the spectrum, on the social equity and some of the day-to-day needs and really where we are now, you know, we're doing these long-term investments, trying to do the long-term planning to lay the groundwork for long-term investments in creating new neighborhoods. But in the meantime, then we have these things that happen to us and we need to snap into action right away. And so with this COVID crisis, we've been spending a lot of time with Mayor Breed and her leadership for the homeless housing situation so that we could work on the quick end to take a piece of property down in the southern waterfront. If you're familiar with that area, it is just between Islayas Creek and Cargo Way. There is a chunk of, I think it's 3 acres of property there that in the course of a month and a half, PUC, PG&E, the Public Works Department, and the port took raw land, put in electrification, brought in, with the state's help, 120 trailers to provide housing for District 10 unhoused people to come and be safe and housed in a way that provided public services too. And the camaraderie and the teamwork that was needed to create this facility was amazing to even a lifer like me who's been working with the city. I mean, usually the bureaucracy to be able to bring this kind of stuff together is paralyzing. But what people are able to do in a true emergency to do something real was very inspiring and empowering to me. And I hope that people understand how hard the city is working to deal with this and how gratified we all feel, as well as the people who are now being able to reside here. But there are things that we can do together to snap into place. And I think this process of housing these people and learning what their needs are will help with our longer term efforts to be more socially and equity aware about longer term initiatives that we should be committed to.
Thanks, Diane. I think that's probably a good note to end on, as it's 12:59 and hopefully an inspiring note of how we can move forward better in the future. I want to thank everybody for coming, especially Diane and also Megan for coordinating with us on all of this. And I also want to remind folks that for attendees, there is a discount for AWE membership with the code PORT of SF. And so with one final question for you, Diane, if folks on this call want to get more involved in port activities, where can they go to learn more?
I can send you a link to our Port Advisory Committee page, and you can sign up to receive notices of meetings. And you'll also have my email as well. So anybody who's got other following questions, I'm happy to field those.
Sounds great. We'll put the link in our next newsletter. Thanks everyone for joining, and we'll catch you next time.
Thanks so much, everyone.